Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. I do want to say thank you for spending the time with us. We promise to be as concise and brief as possible while getting you everything you need to know about our topic today, Microsoft Entra ID. Number one, how to enable it for AI readiness. And then number two, how to master identity governance using Entra ID as a solution. With that being said, my name's Sam Ron. I'll be your host and MC. Again, special shout out to our background superstar players, Ashley for driving the webinar and Gabriel here in a Q&A chat. If you have any questions throughout the course of the webinar, please be sure to pop them in. We'll either answer them in the chat itself or during our Q&A session. With that being said, let's skip on to the agenda to discuss what we'll be diving into. All right, number one, identity access management, or IAM today. What does that mean? What does that look like? Why is that necessary? And why is it important to you? The evolution of Entra ID. Where is its genesis? What was it? What did we know it by? And what is it today, right? And what does that mean for you? Enabling AI readiness. How to make sure that your Entra ID is configured to adopt AI properly and securely. On entry and access, licensing Entra ID. This is our bit to let you know that we can take the sophistication out of the licensing and make it simple for you. Here is your trusted advisor. We're here to help you do just that. And finally, and certainly not least, is mastering identity governance with Entra ID and TTT and how we can help you get to where you want to be. With that being said, I'd like to go over and discuss who's going to be presenting on our call with us today. Obviously myself, Samuel Raw. I lead the solutions marketing function here at TTT, and I'm proud to introduce Gabe.
My name is Gabriel Har. I sit over here on the professional services team alongside Zach Thomas, as well as many of our other talented architects. Me personally, I have over 10 years of experience in the IT space, and my role currently as senior architect really just allows me to consult with organizations like yourselves, hundreds over the last few years, just to understand pain points and, at the end of the day, put together a comprehensive roadmap that makes sense, not just technically, but also with a strong focus on cybersecurity. And Entra is one of Microsoft's premier products to be able to solve a lot of those holes, right? So I'm really excited to be able to talk about how Entra ID can supercharge your organization.
My name is Zach Thomas. I am our lead cloud architect here at Trusted Tech Team. My role in the company rotates around being a escalation point for all of the other architects, as well as being a subject matter expert in multiple areas, including Entra ID, Copilot readiness, and all of the good security features that Microsoft has to offer us. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Anton.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Anton, and I'm proud to represent the account executive team here at Trusted Tech Team. The bulk of what I do is work with organizations of all sizes across all verticals to build custom licensing solutions that are going to be a good fit for their tenant. So with that, I'll pass it back over to Sam.
Awesome. Thank you all. Looking forward to all the great things you guys are going to have to say, not only from a technical perspective, but really from a sales perspective. And not a sales pitch, right? But more so how you can add value and how you can help our customers. Really excited to hear that stuff. Moving on to our first agenda item, identity access management today. With that being said, I'd like to reintroduce Anton because he's way smarter than I am when it comes to this. And I want to make sure that you guys are put in the hands of experts. Take it away, Anton.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So obviously we're here to talk about Microsoft Entra ID, but we can't really get there without first covering identity and access management more at a high level. I saw in the chat, not everyone is fully integrated into Entra ID, so this is a really good launching point so we can start to understand what Entra ID is, just from like the identity access management perspective. So what is identity and access management? It is also known as IAM, and it's really about making sure that the right users in your environment have the appropriate and minimum level of access they need to do their jobs, whether they're inside of your organization as an employee or outside of your organization, such as a vendor or some other partner that you do business with. And IAM plays a critical role in 4 key areas of any organization. So first, we'll talk quickly about security and compliance, right? It goes without saying, but by governing both identities in your environment and what they have access to, you keep unauthorized users out. which reduces the risk of data breaches, but will also help you meet regulatory compliance like SOX, HIPAA, and GDPR compliance, things of that nature. But the second area, which goes kind of hand in hand with security and compliance, is overall risk reduction. So with role-based access control enabled by IAM in an area of least privilege approach, you minimize the risk of accidental or malicious access. So for example, employees in your environment shouldn't be able to see sensitive HR data or access otherwise classified documentation. The third area would be in overall operational efficiency. So IAM solutions will allow your IT team to automate the access provisioning process and deprovisioning process, which will ultimately free up resources in-house while still maintaining a tight level of control over your data. And then lastly, the one that has been overlooked really until recently is AI readiness. So IAM solutions will treat AI agents in your environment like any other user, meaning you can apply the same identity and access policies to your AI agents as you would to an employee or a vendor or anyone else. So just as an example, like if a tool like Microsoft Copilot is in use in the environment, you can prevent users from manipulating Copilot to pull data like executive salaries or internal communications, things of that nature. So sort of in summary, IAM isn't just about security. It's also really foundational to making sure your infrastructure is ready to adopt AI. But with that being said, I am going to pass it over to Gabe to speak about why defending your environment can be so challenging today.
Thank you, Anton. So when we kind of level set, right, we have AI in the mix. We have external bad actors looking to interact with your environment, right? We want to kind of understand where all of this pieces together, right? What we have on screen now is a very typical ransomware campaign that most organizations are experiencing hundreds of these a day, right? You get phishing emails in, have people trying to compromise your identities, your endpoints, and inevitably your domain, right? No matter where they enter from this point, the centralized identity platform that these will have to pass through is going to be whatever you have as your IDP. In this case, we're talking about Entra ID and how that's going to be able to lock down on that. But at the end of the day, each segment of this chain here, if we look at our next slide, is going to be able to essentially have its own protection measures, right? The problem with having all of these protection measures, so on email, spam filtering, alerting, email phishing prevention, and training, these are very introductory elements, right? But where we start to see some issues is when we go across these different platforms to protect, these stop talking to each other, especially in organizations where they may not have, a unified tech stack. So you'll actually find this very prevalent in Microsoft's licensing, that let's say you're on a business premium or you're on an E5, you're going to start to see a lot of these SKUs bundled together so you can form that unified approach. And of course, at the core of all of that, like I mentioned earlier, Entra ID and its governance suites and all of the additional add-on SKUs that you can purchase for that are there to be able to protect your organization where it matters most. So in this case, Entra ID is going to want to adopt as much of a zero trust model as possible so that way you guys are protected because you are always assuming that there's a bad actor in your environment there. Leading us to our next slide.
Yeah, so one of the ways that we can help support all of Microsoft's ideology around our view of identity is talking about the zero trust framework. Microsoft has this embedded in every aspect of Entra ID and has really built it to support the deployment of a zero trust ideology. We have on the screen here some of the key principles inside of zero trust. The ideology of never trusting and continuously verifying. We're going to see this through features including MSA, having device compliance restrictions, even down to some more granular things like network restrictions, specifically needing to be on a specific IP address. And then obviously geofencing can come into play here as well. Then the foundational idea of least privilege inside of Microsoft Entra is huge. You've probably noticed your global admin is becoming less and less powerful inherently, and more, it has the ability to gain the powers, but not having them by default. And that's the whole role-based access idea with RBAC, and really just making sure that no one has more access than they ever need at any given time. Then the ongoing and monitoring and validation with some of the features such as risky users and risky sign-ins that are tracking sign-in activity and looking for anomalies, and then the risky user section that's tracking risky activity. Maybe they're downloading too many documents at the same time, and it just creates an anomaly and then applies a risk element to that. Then you can use a session controller such as conditional access to reinforce something, whether that be, hey, you know, this user just signed in New York and then 30 minutes later signed into in Dubai, right? That's an impossible sign in. So it's going to flag that. And then you can set up a workflow to lock that account out completely. We're just not letting that account sign in anymore because of this status that it has now. And then it needs a manual eye to go and look at and verify that it is indeed safe. Then looking at micro-segmentation, Microsoft Entra does have the ability to have a multi-tenant space, but you also have the ability to be a little bit more granular within a singular tenant with administrative units and dividing up your users into administrative units that other portions of your administrative IT team can help manage. And this kind of supports the ideology of least privilege a little bit further than just the traditional RBAC permissions. And then the assume breach mentality is just kind of a roll up of all of this. It is the idea of constantly challenging things, of constantly monitoring, the constantly just trying to gain an understanding of what is actually happening in the environment and all of those items. Pass this back over to Anton to explain a little bit more about Entra.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. So now that we've covered identity and access management at a high level, as well as discussed sort of the zero trust framework, we're really ready to start talking about Microsoft Entra ID governance. So what is Microsoft's Entra ID? At its core, Entra ID is Microsoft's identity and access management solution, and it helps ensure that the right people have the right access to the right resources in your environment. With Entra ID governance, you're provided with clear visibility into who has access to what. The ultimate goal for organizations looking to implement Entra ID is to reduce identity and access risks by protecting, monitoring, and auditing access to your most critical assets inside of the environment. When we work with organizations looking to implement Entra ID, we help them answer some very critical questions. So a few of these questions would be, who in the environment should have access to which resources, whether they're employees, vendors, or guests? What are users doing with the access that they're granted? Are there proper controls in place to manage the users and their access? And can your auditors verify that the controls that you've implemented are working as intended? These are some very critical questions that organizations will need answered as they look into their environment. Entra ID allows you to answer these questions through a few tools. So the tools that you're given through Entra ID will, one, allow you to govern the identity lifecycle from a user when they're onboarded and they're offboarded. It will allow you to govern the access life cycle, so what users have access to at any point in their career. And it will also give you secure privileged access for administrators of the environment. So Entra ID, in summary, is really about managing identities and access. It's about governing users intelligently and securely throughout the environment. So with that, I will pass it over to Gabe to talk about managing the life cycle of digital identities.
Thank you, Anton. So really quickly, we wanted to have a graphic here to basically show exactly how governance works and how it interacts in this hybrid cloud world, right? We have both on-premise, we have cloud platforms, we have them interconnected in a manner where we're going to want to, have the peace of mind that it's secure, compliant, and that we're not wasting our time as IT administrators on things that should be automated, right? So when we start to see these systems work together with the identity platform like this, you can have your Workday, you can have your SAP to, do those automations such as when employees are onboarded, offboarded, they move within their career, right? These changes go then into Entra ID and then they can propagate out to these other platforms. So whether it be reassigning access to new folders in Box, whether it be reassigning access to certain compute resources in Azure or Google Cloud, even AWS, these, aren't necessarily needing to be Microsoft specific to tie into all of this, right? And of course, on the on-premise side of the house there, you're going to be able to find that, whether you have an Active Directory, whether you're working with another company or partner to where you're interacting with their environment, you're going to find that Entra ID will be able to protect you guys, not only in line with what their security standards are, but with what yours are, allowing that intermobility alongside that security, like I mentioned. So you can see how all of this is orchestrated. With Entra ID governments, you will find that it all goes through a single pane of glass again. So you'll be able to manage all of that all in one spot and inevitably simplify what your day-to-day looks like while also keeping you very, very secure through your multi-factor authentication and other methods of getting into the environment here.
So to play off of that even a little further, Microsoft also offers a full lifecycle management system inside of it. And this has multiple tools inside of Entra playing together to manage the lifecycle of an identity. On the last slide, we saw that Entra ID is kind of the center of it. It's really meant to be an identity center where all of your authentication is happening. But it also allows for tie-ins from other applications to actually provision users into it. So you can connect your HR platform, whether that be Workday, ADP, UKG, almost all of them have some form of integration with Entra that'll let you create these user identities as a user gets onboarded. Then from there, you have the ability to get all of their attributes, everything that you need to know about the user to assign them to the specific roles inside the organization, whether that be permissions to a SharePoint site or just general access into a mailbox. But as far as the actual cycle goes, there's even more automation options. You can utilize dynamic groups based off of the department to assign them to a security group that will allow them to access the needed documents or the needed systems that they need to access. And let's say that role changes. If that department changes, then they're automatically removed from group A, added to group B for the new department, and the user doesn't even notice a difference, really, unless it's something that they were regularly accessing and now still need to access, which of course might happen from time to time, but that is pretty easily resolved because now you know exactly, oh, they were in this group and we can just get them back into that group pretty easily. Then we also have the ability to handle access reviews. So let's say we added someone into a group manually and now we need that to be cycled out on a regular basis. We can set up an access review and send the owners of the group or the managers of whoever is in the group and just challenge, hey, they've been in this group for 6 months. Do they still need access to it? And that's promoting least privilege right there, keeping their privilege down to the least amount that they need to do their job. This also extends into the access that an administrator might have. And on the next slide here, we can see that We even have some lifecycle of administrative access control inside of Entra ID through privileged identity management or privileged access management. We utilize this through just-in-time access protocols where a user has the ability to request that their access be escalated. Maybe you have a help desk user that doesn't normally need anything to do with SharePoint, but now they need to go retrieve a file that someone accidentally deleted and it's in the recovery bin and they just need to go and restore that file. Well, now they can request SharePoint admin access and get the ability to go in and do that. But if that's not a normal part of their role, we can set it so it cycles that out after even just a few hours. They only have a few hours of this access, just a day of access. And that's all inside of this zero trust framework where we don't want users to have too much access, but they still need to be able to do their job. So sometimes they need to be able to get more access. And that's all of this privileged access management and privileged identity management systems inside of Entra ID. I'm going to pass this over to Sam and Anton to talk about the evolution of Entra.
Awesome. Thanks for breaking that down for us, guys. It seems like really the key takeaway there is that you can leverage Entra ID to manage identity lifecycles. And when we do that through a zero trust framework, you can properly and more robustly protect your ecosystem from existing and emerging threats, right? But more importantly than that, using Entra ID to make sure that Microsoft's Copilot has specific swim lanes that it doesn't veer off of. I think those are the key takeaways. Thank you guys for breaking that so much. Oh, thank you guys so much for breaking that down for us. But diving into our next topic at hand, the evolution of Entra ID. How did it start? What was it called then? How did it become Entra ID? Without further ado, we got Anton back with us.
Thank you, Sam. So it goes without saying, Microsoft loves changing their naming conventions for products. Every couple of years it feels like. So we're quickly going to touch on the history of Entra ID. Many of you probably remember Azure Active Directory, which was the older naming convention. About 2 or 3 years ago, Microsoft rebranded it to be Entra ID. The product is more or less the same, but in case anyone kind of missed the change, maybe people still refer to it as Azure Active Directory. Now we're just calling it Entra ID. So you had Azure AD free, that is now Microsoft Entra ID free. You had Azure Active Directory Premium Plan 1, now that's just Entra ID Plan 1, and so on and so forth. So just wanted to include this in case anyone was not in the loop, but now I'm going to pass it over to Gabe to talk about the Entra ID family.
Thank you, Anton. So just to expand on what Anton just covered. So what a lot of you may or may not know about the Entra ID platform, there's actually a number of SKUs that sit behind as add-ons, what you would generally find in Microsoft's documentation, right? So on the far left here, P1 is going to be enabling zero trust access controls, but of course you have those P2s and additional licensing, right? But even beyond that, you have things like the ability to secure down on employee access using Entra private access, Entra internet access, governance, and so on and so forth, right? With these tiers, this is going to be a sliding scale of what does your organization need. At no point during this would we say that because you have this license, you are now protected, right? As with anything Microsoft, we generally find that getting the license enables the features, yes, but you'll always need to go in with a guiding hand to make sure that you guys are set up correctly, right? Beyond that as well, of course, the external IDs, very similar to the external identities that you've worked with in the past in Azure AD. With these protections in place here, you can, of course, extend what your own organization security stance is to any data that's an external factor may be accessing in your environment. So if they don't have the same security standards you do, very simple to block those out and make sure that anyone getting into your environment is as secure as you would like. Right. And then finally, the last element here is you're going to find on the far right is secure access into any cloud. Really what this means is it's being able to place this similar to the last graphic that I covered, interacting with an AWS, with Google Cloud Platform, and making sure that the permission sets that they have there aren't just unique to that platform, but they tie back together. with the Entra family, right? And you'll start to see as well, when you look at the bottom of this chart here, you do have Copilot for security. If you had the question in your mind of kind of how does this interact together, you will find that Copilot for security, this is just one of many fingers. The Entra family here we're talking about is one of many fingers that Copilot for security will be able to propagate through your environment to be able to better secure down from a regular basis without having like a SOC to manually parse through this data on the regular, right? That AI agent will do that for you. But wanted to pass it back to Sam just so that we can kind of lean ourselves into the AI side of the house here.
Awesome. Gabe, thank you so much for that overview of the Entra solution family, how Copilot security permeates into that. But I did want to ask you to talk more about what our customers or what our attendees need to know about enabling AI readiness, especially with Entra ID and the Entra solution family.
Yeah, thank you. So just wanted to take a look at this next slide here, right? So we have a bunch of different concepts that we would consider to be essential when you're considering your stance on AI readiness, right? Not all of this will be on Entra ID, but as you can see in green here, Entra ID governance is a huge portion still of what we would consider a good stance to have, right? I want to start at the top of the list here with AI strategy, right? These are just things that from a road mapping perspective, we would say that any organization should have in place. With your strategy, this is where you start, right? This is where you need to understand what are we actually planning on using AI for? What is the value it's going to drive? What are the outcomes that I'm expecting with this, right? And this is going to be true for both a custom solution as well as if your organization wants to leverage something like Copilot. Copilot itself has degrees on top of that where you could potentially use Studio and so on as well. So just having a good stance here is extremely important. From that strategy, you can build a roadmap as far as what do I actually want to do to implement the proper AI solution? What are my timelines like? Which key internal resources do I need to leverage for this? Do I need to go to an outside third party to make sure I'm getting the expertise I need to be able to build something, right? On the data readiness side, this is where you need to investigate, well, I have an idea of where I want to go. I want to build a chatbot for XYZ, but I need to feed it certain data, right? Is that data parsable? Is it structured? Is it formatted in a way where that AI can actually action upon it, right? We need to make sure that we do that cleanup ahead of time. From there, infrastructure, this is where you're going to be able to say, where am I getting my resources to run said AI? Am I leveraging Microsoft's platform? Am I leveraging compute on AWS? Whatever that may end up looking like, you need to determine where that compute's coming from, as well as, of course, I'm sure your financial team would love for you to also find out what that will cost on a regular basis, right? And then from the other side of the house here, we have governance, right? This is where we usually find the most holes. And the reason being is that when you have AI agents in your environment, generally it's going to, of course, be interacting with your organization's data space. So there needs to be flags and abilities for an auditor to come in and say, hey, I know you've been using AI. Have you been using it responsibly? Has it been kind of just operating as this uh, administrative factor that can do whatever it wants? We need to have some degrees of restriction on that, right? And where Entra ID slots in here is that anytime you're using a tool, for example, like Copilot, it's going to actually leverage that specific user who's utilizing that tool's identity and whatever permission sets they have applied to them. So if you have a strong zero trust stance within your Entra ID and you've integrated all of those platforms I talked about earlier, you'll find that AI agents are much more constrained as far as what they can do. And of course, the user querying them will have much less of a chance to prompt engineer their way into a corner that they shouldn't be in, right? And I'm not saying that all of your employees are going to be these malicious actors, but there, as we discussed on the earlier slides, there's always the option that they could be. So you always have to assume breach. So you want to have this layer of protection in place. And then finally, beyond that, of course, you are going to want AI talent, right? And what this means is, your organization may or may not have an AI, engineer on your side, and we understand that. So from our perspective as Trusted Tech Team, we want to be your partner on that side to make sure that you get the skill set that you need in leveraging or building out any of these steps here to make sure that your organization is ready for AI in this way. With that being said, I do want to pass it back over to Zach just to talk about AI adoption and the readiness factors there as well.
Yeah, definitely. So once we get into what do we actually need, what are kind of our prerequisites, our steps that we want in place, and what is actually going to support AI here. And just to be clear, we're talking about AI in general, not necessarily just integrating with Copilot, but also the utilization of AI agents from other third-party AI sources such as OpenAI's ChatGPT, Gemini, or even one of the AWS AIs. But to start with, always, always, always the foundation is going to be the secure access and authentication process. And this can go for users, this can go for agents that are acting as users, so service principals as well. And that is using conditional access to lock down portions there. And for the users, making sure that we're utilizing the authentication strengths feature and preventing users from using unsecure authentication methods and pushing them towards the more phish resistant authentication methods, such as a FIDO2 key, or maybe even in some cases a device certificate that lets them authenticate in. And then as we're moving down the line and more companies are able to promote some form of passwordless authentication, the less a user has to type in a password, the less likely that password is to get breached, right? So passwordless authentication is really a big idea and kind of this up and coming thing that a lot of companies are pushing towards right now. Over to the identity governance side of things, where we're looking at access reviews, our lifecycle management, our least privileged access through RBAC, and our dynamic groups, making sure that no one is having too much permission. And if they do need the higher permission, to rotate out those permissions as necessary. Then we also have some AI features. Copilot is built into Microsoft 365 at this point, and Microsoft Copilot security is a possibility to kind of help with some of this monitoring, help with some of these recommendations and configurations, and letting you guys have a more holistic view, but also making sure that we're using Purview to monitor some of these prompts that users are putting in or some of these actions that Copilot is actually taking. And as well as making sure that we're locking down some portions of enterprise applications where users might be able to create enterprise applications inside of your environment, and in some cases without a administrator knowing. There's some features that there's some security settings there that we'll want to modify and say, hey, users aren't allowed to just click that sign in with Microsoft button on a website and then just get in and possibly provide access to company information through an AI. Now, it's only going to be what they have access to do, so it's not an administrative level, but it's still their permissions that it follows. So if you're dealing with a pretty permissive user, then it could be not a great time. And obviously, at the end of the day, AI is to enhance the productivity of a user. That's what we're trying to encourage here. That's what we're trying to get users to actually do, is understand the value of AI. I'm going to pass this back over to Gabe to talk about some of the actual implications.
Yeah, so kind of wrapping this back together again. So once you've started using these governance features, particularly within Entra ID here, you're going to start to be able to see, some common and easy wins for automation, right? When it comes to creating or modifying or deleting AD and Entra entries, right? You can use that HRIS system that's integrated all together to provision that or deprovision that, right? When it comes to assigning licenses, you can do that in a group-based manner. Those dynamic groups that Zach's talked about several times here, those dynamic groups can funnel into other aspects of your organization, from a access perspective to a what tools are you actually using for these users, and so on. So being able to kind of layer these things together is going to be hugely important. And you'll see that the automations that are available here continue to our next slide as well, to where we can take a look at things like access reviews and so on. And from there, we can extend this to kind of go back to that whole approach of we have zero trust, we're securing our internal users, our external users, and all of our compute. You'll see that external users and so on factor in here as well. So let's say that your organization regularly contracts and works with other companies. Maybe the access that was granted 2 years ago shouldn't be active anymore. So making sure that we wrap in that lifecycle management as well to be able to protect you guys in that manner. It's going to simplify your lives as well when it comes to the next time you get audited, the next time you get pen tested. Leaving these sorts of permissions in your environment is just another open hole. You may as well patch it straight out of the gate. And regardless of which identity platform you use, I know we've put a really strong emphasis on Entra ID here. You're going to find that there's elements of this in each of them. And whichever platform you end up using, we just want to make sure that you're utilizing what you can to keep yourselves secure.
Awesome.
So let's talk about some of the largest prerequisites for actually getting into some of these things. First and foremost, plan the lifecycle management of the lifecycle of a user out. Where can access reviews fit in? Where can we use dynamic groups? Where can we actually challenge a user's access to company data? And that's still just supporting the second point, which is zero trust, and having some device configurations that might support everything, utilizing Intune compliance to say, hey, we need a compliant device for a user to sign in with. And if they don't have that compliant device, not happening. Then also the least privilege ideology. Never give someone, you hire a new admin, what are they going to be doing with their access? Do they need that global admin, or do they really just need Exchange admin because that's all that they're actually utilizing? That's kind of where we are, is making sure that we're supporting all of those items from a very granular level and really kind of just challenging the access that users actually have. It might be nice for them to have that access, but do they actually need to have that access to do their job? We'll pass this back over to Sam to introduce the next portion.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for the rundown of how to be AI ready with Entra ID. I know the chat's been buzzing with data and how to properly manage data in order to properly leverage AI. I think it's important to call out how all these things work together, right? Because in an environment where you want to properly leverage data, you want to make sure the right people have the right access to the right data for the right reasons to then spur the right use cases. And so this is a great convergence of what's going on in the chat versus the subject matter expertise you guys bring to the table. But pivoting that subject matter expertise, I do want to pass it off to Anton to go over the licensing ecosystem around Entra as a solution. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. So we've spoken about AI readiness. We've touched on identity and access management and Entra ID and the Entra ID family. Now let's talk licensing, right? For those of us who have not fully integrated into Entra ID but want to know what our options are, or maybe those of us who just haven't done a license refresh in a while, we haven't really reviewed what's in our tenant in some time, and we just need a reminder, we'll start here. So you will always have access to a free form of Microsoft's Entra ID through most M365 subscriptions. So whether you're on a business basic or a business standard license, you will unlock some free features of Entra ID like single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. That will typically be included in any M365 subscription. But you'll start unlocking things like access management when you move to the Microsoft Entra ID Plan 1. So when we're looking at Entra ID Plan 1, it's available in a few different areas. So you can always buy Plan 1 a la carte as its own standalone license in the Admin Center, but it's also included in several licensing bundles. So for the small to medium business, typically 300 users and below, it's included in the Business Premium license. Business Premium is a great value proposition. It includes a lot, including Microsoft's Entra ID Plan 1 and Intune, which will go hand in hand with Entra ID Plan 1. I know we ran a webinar last month on Intune, but Business Premium may be the way to go for small to medium-sized organizations. Plan 1 is also included in the E3 SKU, so the Microsoft 365 E3, and it's also available in the EMS E3 security add-on. So you'll have a few different options for Entra ID Plan 1. Again, Plan 1 is really geared towards access management. Moving on to the Entra ID Plan 2, similar to the Plan 1, it's always available as a standalone license, but it's included in the Microsoft 365 E5, more of that robust licensing package. I saw a few people in the chat are leveraging the E5, so Entra ID Plan 2 is going to be included there as well. If you don't buy it as a standalone license and maybe you just haven't convinced the right people to open up the budget for a full E5 upgrade, you can also get Entra ID Plan 2 in the EMS E5 bundle as well. So the EMS E5 will typically be tacked on to a lesser license, like an Office E1 or a Frontline SKU, something of that nature. But that is the kind of basic, those are the basic options for licensing Entra ID. Now I'll pass it over to Zach to talk about some advanced licensing options.
Yeah, so on top of the licensing that Anton just mentioned here, Microsoft also offers a SKU called Microsoft Entra Suite. And this is meant to be an add-on to your P1 or P2. Now, a lot of these features are included in the P2, but some of them aren't. For example, the Global Secure Access Suite, which is a combination of the Microsoft Entra Private Access and Microsoft Entra Internet Access suites. The Private Access Suite functions more along the lines of a ZTNA tunnel to your on-premise network. It uses BGP protocol and secure IPsec keys and key rotation and all of the nice security stuff, but it relies on an agent sitting on the physical computer and can be used to give line of sight to your on-premise network. Then there's the Internet Access SKU, which also it relies on the same agent, but this SKU is more along the lines of internet browsing security, utilizing the rating of a website, whether you're trying to block things that users shouldn't be accessing at work, right? The whole list of things, and each company has a different list. Some of it's just general violence, some of it is NSFW material, all of that type of stuff that we just don't want on our work machines because they're known to have viruses embedded in the website. They're known to just be not safe for work and just something that we don't want our users using our company devices to access. So it's nice that Microsoft finally has a tool that is coming into maturity slowly but quickly and has been deployed on a few of our client environments already. You also get the ID governance, ID protection, and verified ID portions. Governance, of course, being your lifecycle management features, the access reviews, and that type of stuff. And then protection being more along the lines of your session controlling, your actual conditional access policies, authentication strengths. How are we actually enrolling users into MFA also? And all of those portions there. So this suite is really just kind of an expansion and is just a single SKU to give you everything that Entra has to offer. Go ahead and pass this back over to Anton to talk about some scenarios.
Perfect. Thank you, Zach. So we'll kind of close out. We've spoken about Entra ID, AI readiness, and zero trust. Now let's just wrap everything up in a neat little bow talking about the use cases, right? Like what will this look like in your environment? So just to reiterate, Entra ID is built to address two core identity governance challenges. One is managing the identity lifecycle, and two is governing access to applications. So we'll start by kind of talking about the use case for governing the lifecycle of employees and other guests. Modern identity governance really starts with managing how identities are created, maintained, and retired, as we've already spoken about, not just for employees, but for vendors and other users in the environment. When you implement, identity governance, you'll ensure that everyone who needs access can collaborate securely and only for as long as they need it, right? Minimum access. For this type of identity governance, we will always recommend Microsoft's Entra ID Plan 2, again, for identity governance. That would be kind of one half of Entra ID. The second half, or the second use case, would be governing access to applications. So it's not enough to provision access when a user is onboarded. Organizations generally need a scalable and ongoing process to manage, review, and enforce access controls as roles change inside of your organization, right? I believe Gabe and Zach mentioned, maybe you gave someone access to something 2 years ago, but it may be time to revisit that access and see if they still need it or not. With Entra ID, you can develop access policies that apply across your entire application landscape to help maintain compliance and security at scale. So for this level of governing access to applications, we'll recommend Entra ID Plan 1. Again, included in things like the Business Premium SKU, the E3, or just purchased standalone. But with that said, I'm going to pass it back over to Sam for some closing remarks.
All right. Thank you guys so much for the overview of Entra ID, how to make sure that it's configured and set up properly to adopt AI, specifically Microsoft Copilot. Thank you to our attendees for spending the time with us. If you have further questions or would like to explore or even assess Entra ID as it's set up within your environment today, please let us know. If you're an existing customer, don't worry, our account managers will be reaching out to you for any questions or any concerns you may have. If you're just here, just visiting and wanting to learn, but want to still get involved, reach out to expert@trustedtechteam.com. We're here to help you. At day's end, it comes down to the right solution for the right people at the right price for the right reasons with the right use cases. So we want to make sure that we're delivering value there. With that being said, I do want to switch gears and pivot over to our Q&A session. There was a question about the impossible travel use case that was shared earlier, and whether or not that affects the VPNs. Just want to let you guys know the answer to that is first it'll block and then ask if this person or this access has to be granted. And then it'll pursue that way for VPN related instances. There was another question that came in through the chat here from Rajat on the Copilot Admin Center under Data Access tab. If the agents are selected, if agents are set to selected groups, does that only allow that group to create new agents, or does it remove agents from all devices and only deploy to specified group? Gabe, Zach, would you guys be able to answer that for us?
Taking a look at this, Copilot Admin Center, I'm presuming that this is under Copilot Studio rather than Copilot Standard, because agents leads me to believe it's Studio. But yes, the access groups that you set on that as far as who can use said agent will apply, a restriction on that for any users outside of that group. They wouldn't even see that agent as available.
Awesome. Thank you for clearing that up for us. We have a couple more questions that did come through. It'll take us through the end of time here, but does Microsoft Entra ID provide a self-service portal for users in my organization?
Yeah, it does. Microsoft does offer self-service password reset for those items. There are also some self-service features where for example, if they have an actual Microsoft 365 Studio license for actual Microsoft 365 Copilot license, they can go in and create their own agents. They can do that in the chat, but it's not it's just kind of like a little chat bot that they're creating. The agent functionality comes in and they can go do that inside of the Copilot side of things. I'm not 100% sure if they were wanting self-service on something else, but the self-service approach is very much able to be turned on inside of Entra. It is off by default, though.
Gotcha. No, thank you for clearing that up for us. There was another couple more questions that did come in. This next question is around single sign-on, but how do I set up single sign-on between my on-premise directory and my cloud applications?
So,
So
go
go ahead, Zach.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. You can use the Entra ID Connect client to sync the identities together. The SSO will ultimately happen on the cloud side, but it will ultimately be the identity source of truth is going to be your on-premise environment. You can also flip that if you were to federate and use ADFS and fully federate your on-premise environment and then use the on-premise authentication to promote your cloud authentication, and SSO can still be implemented through that in similar manners. It would still be configured inside of Entra, and then the ADFS would just jump in and take over the authentication as a user tries to sign in.
No, that's great to know. Appreciate that. All right, next question. Does Microsoft Entra ID help me manage my own on-premise infrastructure?
It does. It's not going to be complete management to where it'll tell you everything that's ever wrong with your on-prem infrastructure ever, but you do have access to the Entra Connect Help, panel there in the cloud. And essentially what it'll do is it'll not only monitor the health of your synchronization that you have set up with your on-prem, but it'll also give you some, if there's any sort of major problem indicators that are coming out from that, such as OU's not syncing over or incompatible metadata, those sorts of things. It will alert you, and it's fairly easy to resolve as an administrator at that point.
Gotcha, gotcha. So the keynote there is really leveraging Microsoft Entra Connect Health to better manage your IT infrastructure. Great. No, that's great to know. Next question. How long does it take for a password to be written back to Active Directory on-premise? Second part of the question, can I use said password write back with passwords that are managed by an admin?
Could you repeat that question? Sorry.
Yeah. All right. So it's a two-part question. How long does it take for a password to be written back to Active Directory on-premise? And then second part of that question is, can I use password write back with passwords that are managed by an admin?
So the write back process, as long as you actually have the write back feature turned on inside of your interconnect agent inside of your whatever server is hosting it, whether that be the domain controller, a dedicated app server, you do have to have the feature turned on the application that sits on the server. But the actual connection is pretty close to real time. I've had it take around 10 minutes before, but that is abnormal. It usually happens within a few minutes, most of the time sub 2 minutes. It depends on your internet connection, of course, and how quickly that can download. And then the second part of that question, I'm assuming you're talking about when an admin changes the password. And yes, that still syncs up just fine and will push the password back over to your on-premise.
Great, that's great to know. There's a couple questions that actually came through the chat and not the Q&A. So let me make sure I touch on those. So if someone has, as listed in their license center, Azure Active Directory P1, does that mean that that person or that admin now has Entra ID P1, or do they need to explore upgrading those licenses to Entra?
Same thing at the end of the day. I would be really surprised if you're still seeing it say Azure AD P1 still. I think Microsoft officially cycled all of those SKUs and updated them about a year ago.
Gotcha. All right. And then here's one to end it. It's a really robust one, but can you help us understand and can you help our attendees understand the relationship that exists from an interoperability perspective between Entra ID, how it works with Azure, and other Microsoft services and solutions like, say, for example, Microsoft 365?
Azure is the center of identity. Everything that happens, any authentication to any Microsoft product, whether that be business or enterprise or existing in Azure, ultimately happens through Entra ID. It was originally called Azure AD because of this, and that caused confusion, of course, because they were like, oh, it's an Azure product and I need an Azure subscription. So they changed it to Entra. But yeah, that's Microsoft's whole identity core is Entra ID.
No, thank you for connecting the dots for us there. Oh, go ahead, Gabe.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So every day, I'd say at least 2 to 3 customers that I talk to, they say that they have Azure, but in reality, it's just the Azure AD and now called Entra ID portion. So the two tie very, very closely together. You'll actually find on both sides, you'll be able to access the exact same portals and blades. But of course, it just depends on where you're getting there from. So yeah, very, very closely tied together, but not necessarily meaning you are in Azure when you leverage that.
No, and I think that's such an important distinction to make, right? Just because you have Azure Active Directory doesn't mean you have access to the full suite of Azure capable services and functions, features, etc. No, I think that's super important to clarify. We are at time here, so I do want to thank all of our attendees, and I do want to thank our panel here. Thank you, Ashley and Gabriel in the background, for answering the Q&A and driving this webinar. If you have any questions or concerns, we're here for you. We want to make sure that not only are you properly able to implement Entra ID, but if you are exploring AI, that as well. Let us know if you have any questions or concerns. Otherwise, have a great week and have a great rest of your day.